trying to go wire to wire. Second touchdown for the rookie.
Trent Sherfield got it. Trey Area.
Callaway, it is caught. Touchdown.
Deep shot. End zone. It is caught. Yeboah.
First with an incredible one-handed grab.
Did he catch that for a touchdown? Chris Meyer.
Braden Smith makes the catch for the touchdown.
Welcome in, everyone, to the Lucky Shots podcast. I am Ricky Larson. Quick episode today as we are just going to take a look at some news and notes, some pivots, and some fantasy risers and fallers from all of the news that has come at the end of this preseason with cuts, releases, trades, all those kind of things, injuries. So we're just going to hop into that and kind of see where you should move when these things happen. Don't forget to follow the show on Twitter and Facebook. Make sure to share the pages and the shows. You can watch the show on YouTube at Lucky Shots Media. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you are watching and would rather listen to the podcast on Anchor, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Pocket Cast, Radio Public, or Spotify. The links are in the Twitter and Facebook bios. So without further ado, let's hop into the news and notes that happened at the end of this preseason. So we have Irv Smith, tight end for the Minnesota Vikings, has a meniscus tear. Surgery is pending on that. He's possibly going to be out several weeks, could be the entire season. So where do we pivot from that? We'll get to that a little later. But he is a tight end that was probably drafted, so we will have to figure out where to go from there. For the Packers, David Bakhtiari has an ACL injury. He was placed on the PUP list, so for the first few games of the year, the Packers won't have him. How is that going to affect Aaron Rodgers, Aaron Jones, Devontae Adams, without that top lineman being there? Deshaun Watson, his whole situation is just keeps unfolding into new twists, new turns. But the Texans are keeping him on the 53-man roster. Probably just going to sit him the whole time. But the main team that is pushing for a trade is the Dolphins. And if they would trade for Deshaun Watson, you would have to believe Tua Tagovailoa would also be a part of that trade. So how does that affect the Texans? How does that affect the Dolphins? I believe the Dolphins become a better team with a passer like Deshaun Watson. But all of this is just rumor. There's nothing set in stone, and the Texans obviously want a very high draft price or trade price with draft picks from teams who would like to acquire Deshaun Watson. So that is something we will have to monitor throughout the season. Some big news, the Patriots released Cam Newton. That's all we're going to get into right now with that. We will talk about that later with our pivots. Trey Lance had a minor finger injury in practice. He is slated to miss about a week. That's okay, 2 weeks until the season. He probably won't start, but eventually he will be the starter. So this finger injury, he'll have plenty of time to let it fully heal, recover, and hop in whenever he is needed. Another big injury, J.K. Dobbins. He had an ACL tear. He's out for the whole season. So where does that put the Ravens offense? Where does that put you in fantasy if you drafted him? Again, we'll get to that in pivots. Hurricane Ida has been a big deal. It hit 16 years to the day after Hurricane Katrina, and it's affecting the Saints again. The Saints are practicing in Dallas right now. Week 1 home game versus the Packers is unlikely to be in New Orleans, and they possibly won't have a home game for quite a while. It's looking like all of August or September they will not have a home game. So we'll have to see how that affects their schedule and how the team plays. Because if you're not at home, you don't have that home field advantage. Moving on, T.Y. Hilton. He's got a neck injury. It's a disc issue, and his timeline is unsure. There's not a whole lot about it, but the idea is that he isn't going to be around for quite a while. It would be very surprising to see him back at any point in this season. So receivers for the Colts, we'll have to look at that a little later. Jameis Winston was named the starter for the New Orleans Saints. I like the decision. It gives this offense more of that passing ability and can benefit all of the tools around the quarterback in New Orleans for fantasy. But with Michael Thomas being out and his timetable unsure, I believe he was also put on the PUP list. So he's out for at least 5 to 6 games. And Traquan Smith, his timetable is also unsure. Where do you turn from there in that Saints passing game? And then Teddy Bridgewater was named the starter for the Broncos. Also kind of a shock. A lot of people figured it would be Drew Lock, but they're going with Teddy, and we'll have to see how that affects all of the pass catchers and the offense for Denver this season. So we've been talking about pivots. Let's hop into that. So the Patriots situation. Cam Newton is cut. This was a very big surprise. Cam Newton was expected to at least start the season, with Mac Jones eventually taking over at some point, but he didn't even make it to the regular season. So now Mac Jones is going to step into that starting role right away. And a cool note, he's playing Tua in the season opener. So what does this mean for the rest of the Patriots lineup? Damian Harris, I believe it makes his value rise quite a bit because the person who took most of those goal line rushes was Cam Newton. And then, Sony Michel is gone. One of their other running backs is gone. So a lot of that volume is going to go to Damian Harris. And Mac Jones is a better passer, in my opinion, than Cam Newton. So he could see more volume in the passing game as well. And like I said, there's no Cam Newton there to steal those touchdowns, which I believe makes his stock rise. Jacoby Myers, probably the most talented receiver for that team, now has a better passer. And he's a guy that I liked anyway because Cam Newton liked him as well, throwing the ball to him. So now he's a big athletic receiver and has a guy who can competently throw him the football. So I believe his value rises as well up into a wide receiver 1 or 2 spot. I don't believe so, but it makes him a pretty viable flex option. And then the Patriots tight ends. They brought in Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry this year, and the idea is that they're going to run a lot of 2 tight end sets, and with both of those guys being very good pass catchers, very good blockers, they will get a lot more value, I believe, as well with Mac Jones, and both of them could even be viable starters with how the tight end position is nowadays. If you don't have Kelsey, Waller, or Kittle, it's kind of a toss-up for everybody else, and I believe those two will get a lot of red zone targets because of their size and how well they do in the red zone. Moving on from the Patriots, we're going to move on to J.K. Dobbins. He is out for the season with a torn ACL. So where does that leave you? For me, I drafted him last Saturday right before he got hurt, so I had to pivot as well. Where did I pivot? Well, Gus Edwards. Easily. Gus the Bus Edwards. He, in his last 3 seasons for Baltimore, has seen 133 attempts and 700 yards each of those 3 seasons. In 2020, so last season, he faced a stacked box 34% of his attempts. So people saying, oh, well, he's going to get this box stacked against him. It's going to take away from his fantasy value. That's what he's used to. And that's what the Ravens are used to. The Ravens run the ball all the time. Defenses know that they're going to run the ball, and they still do it effectively. So because the box is going to be stacked, they run a lot of options. So they're not going to know whether or not to go for Lamar or Gus, and he's going to still have value regardless of if they stack the box or not. He was 21st last year in rushing yards with 723. This is all while splitting with J.K. Dobbins and Mark Ingram. So as him being the solo back there now, you got to believe that's easily going to go up and give him obviously more value. The Ravens run the ball on average 539 times a season. That is first in the league over the past however many seasons that Lamar has been in the league. That's a lot of attempts, and you're looking at those being split between Lamar and Gus. So that's a lot of touches, a lot of opportunities. Volume equals opportunity, which equals fantasy value if he can make the most of it. Edwards also led the backfield in attempts last season, again splitting with Dobbins and with Mark Ingram with 144 attempts. This season, he is projected 220 attempts for just over 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns according to Fantasy Pros. I like those projections. Those are very realistic and give you a good idea of where he should be. So for me, he's a great pivot option from J.K. Dobbins. He's probably not available in many leagues, especially now since that happened. But if he still is available, or if you need to pivot, trading for Gus Edwards wouldn't be the worst idea either. I put him at a high-end running back 2 or even a low-end running back 1, so he is a great option for your team. Moving on to the Irv Smith injury, again, it is his meniscus, and his timetable is anywhere from weeks to the whole season. So where do you pivot from there if you drafted him as your tight end? Well, Tyler Conklin maybe would be a pivot. Well, he has a hamstring injury, and his outlook is also unknown, and he obviously isn't Irv Smith, so, it's not really a good pivot. And if I had Irv Smith and I was going to look for something else, I don't think it'd be Tyler Conklin. Well, then the Vikings also yesterday traded for Chris Herndon. He had low production with the Jets, and again, I wouldn't even say on the level of Tyler Conklin, so he's also probably not a place that I would pivot. And especially if you look at who they target in the red zone, yes, it was Irv Smith and Adam Thielen. Do I think these other two guys for Minnesota are going to all of a sudden just absorb those red zone targets? I don't think so. I think it still goes to Adam Thielen and possibly Dalvin Cook, and then you still have Justin Jefferson. So I honestly, if you had Irv Smith and he's hurt and you have him in your IR spot now, don't pivot to other Vikings tight ends. I don't think that's the way to go. Other tight ends that I would pivot to, here's some names. You have Gerald Everett for the Seattle Seahawks. He is only 6.4% rostered, and this is a pass-heavy offense. Russell Wilson likes throwing to a tight end. Will Disley had quite a bit of fantasy value last year from Russ throwing him the football. So he is somebody who is not heavily rostered and has a lot of upside in that kind of offense with a quarterback like Russell Wilson. Then you have Blake Jarwin for the Dallas Cowboys. A lot of people are forgetting about Blake Jarwin. He's only 8.2% rostered, and had he not been hurt last season, he would have been the tight end 1 for the Dallas Cowboys. He's just a really, really good tight end, and he's also in a pass-heavy offense where there's plenty of targets to go around, and he is a big tight end, so those red zone targets are going to be there. So he is another valuable pivot option who is not heavily rostered. Then you have Cole Kmet for the Chicago Bears. He's 16% rostered. I don't know how the Bears offense is going to be, but if you watched last year, they targeted Jimmy Graham a lot. Jimmy Grandpa got into the end zone quite a bit, had a lot more targets than he should have had. Cole Kmet is a lot younger, a lot more spry, and I think he absorbs a Jimmy Graham workload and possibly even more because he's a little more athletic than Jimmy Graham, so he's also a great pivot option. My favorite pivot option would be Jared Cook. He's 16.5% rostered. And look at the team he went to. He plays for the Chargers now. Justin Herbert loved throwing the ball to Hunter Henry last year. Obviously Keenan Allen is that number one target. But he threw a lot of passes also to Hunter Henry last year, a lot of red zone targets. That gets absorbed by Jared Cook. I think Jared Cook is a very valuable tight end. I mean, he was a streaming option the past couple of years with the Saints, and Drew Brees necessarily wasn't the best passer towards the end to throw to tight ends. Justin Herbert is, and yes, there is the concern that the targets may not be there because they might all go to Austin Eckler and Keenan Allen. But there's a lot of upside to having Jared Cook as that tight end. He's not going to have a lot of boom weeks, but he could be a consistent 7 to 10 points a week, and it's a lot better than going with one of those other Vikings tight ends. Now we hop into some people who are more rostered, probably harder to get, but still noteworthy, and you might want to check your waivers just to make sure that they aren't there. You have Austin Hooper for the Cleveland Browns, 43% rostered. Evan Ingram for the New York Giants, he's 57% rostered. And Tyler Higbee, who's 65% rostered. All of those guys, very viable and give you quite a bit of value. I would say any of those three have the possibility of giving you 10 or more points out of that tight end position every week and have a possibility of a touchdown every week as well. So those are pivot options. If you had Irv Smith, that's the route I would go instead of trying to replace him with one of the other tight ends. And like I said, the impact on the Vikings wide receivers, Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, more targets are available, and more red zone targets, I believe, are now available. So those two, their stock goes up, and a lot of people wanted to regress on Adam Thielen. Well, now he was the main guy targeted in the red zone for the Vikings last year. I believe it's going right back to there without a decent tight end. Now we'll move on to the Saints and Jameis Winston, where he was named the starter over Taysom Hill. Back in 2019 with Tampa, because we're not going to look at last year, he was a backup. So in his last starting season, he was number 1 in attempts, number 1 in deep attempts, number 1 in passing yards, and number 1 in air yards. That's all you want to hear. I mean, sure, he'll throw a lot of interceptions. Sure, it might be messy. But he's got the arm and the confidence to throw it down the field, pick up big chunks, score touchdowns. So, I mean, this is a win-win for your team, especially if you waited on a quarterback a little too long in your drafts and ended up with somebody you didn't like. He was also number 2 in passing touchdowns and air yards per attempt. So again, those big plays, those passing yards, that possibility is there, and he could put up quite a few fantasy points for you. The only problem is Michael Thomas is out indefinitely. Traquan Smith is out indefinitely. So where does that leave the targets to go in that offense? Well, obviously you're going to have Alvin Kamara. His targets probably go up. He probably ends up being the leading receiver for the team at the end of the year. But a guy that really blew up in preseason, and I'm pretty high on just from watching him play, is Marquez Callaway. He had 8 receptions for 165 yards and 2 touchdowns. And those 2 touchdowns, if you didn't see them, go look them up, because, wow. I mean, that's what has me excited about this kid. He is dynamite. Those catches were incredible, and if Jameis can throw the ball to him the way he did on those 2 touchdowns, and Callaway can make those plays, he's got a high value. And without Traquan Smith or Michael Thomas, he turns into the wide receiver 1 for that team and could see a lot of volume, putting him into easily a flex position, maybe even a wide receiver 2. That's a bold prediction. May not happen, but again, if you built up your running backs, didn't get great receivers, Marquez Callaway is a great option, and with Jameis Winston, his value goes up through the roof, in my opinion. All right, let's move on to the Broncos and Teddy Bridgewater, where he was named the starter over Drew Lock. The situation for Drew Lock is unknown now. Talks that he may be traded. I think the Broncos are going to keep him on the bench. And unfortunately, as a Broncos fan, there could be a quarterback carousel throughout the season with those two. You know, Teddy may play bad. They may be like, okay, let's put in Drew Lock. And I feel like there's going to be a lot of inconsistency. But if Teddy stays in, here are the numbers. With Carolina last year, 7.5 yards per attempt, 7.08 air yards per attempt, 75% true completion percentage, and 79% catchable pass rate. That's huge because the Broncos have guys that are quick off the line, a lot of quick, short passes. Jerry Jeudy, for example, this makes his value go way up. Jeudy could have been a lot better than he was last year. One, if he didn't have the drops, but two, if he had catchable passes. There were times that he was way open. Great separation, and Drew Lock just missed him. With those numbers of 75% true completion percentage and 79%, almost 80% catchable pass rate, that means there's those opportunities that Jeudy missed last year because of those overthrown, underthrown balls. He's now going to get those. And then we can see him after the catch. And if you watched him throughout the preseason and mostly camp, he's looking incredible. And, you know, if he can clean up the drops and Teddy can give him catchable passes, I think he turns into the top receiver for the Broncos this year. This gives, honestly, everybody an enhanced value in the passing game just because they're shorter, quicker passes, more targets going out, and we'll just have to see how that works out for the Broncos. But I think Jerry Jeudy, his value goes way up, and he's a guy that you should look at. And I think you should bet higher on all of the Broncos receivers. Courtland Sutton's going to be back, and he is a great athlete. Noah Fant, fully healthy. So when they have catchable passes and they don't have to, you know, go way downfield and fight coverage, that's got to bring their value up. And then we'll finish off with T.Y. Hilton's neck injury. So I don't believe anybody would be starting T.Y. Hilton. But where do you pivot from there, or who do you value now in the Colts passing game? For me, the highest upside I see is in Michael Pittman Jr. They brought him in to be this kind of guy, be that number one target. So we'll just have to see how it goes for him. You also have Paris Campbell and Zach Pascal. There's been a lot of talk about Zach Pascal and how excited analysts are, how excited the coaching staff, other players around him are, that he could have a great year. Who has the most value out of these guys? I don't know. Again, if you had T.Y. Hilton and you're trying to pivot, I would pivot elsewhere to people like Marquez Callaway instead of any of these three. Wait on these three because I doubt they're going to go off of waivers very quickly until they blow up. So I would still shy away from all of those guys. And the quarterback situation in Indy is still unknown. You have Sam Ehlinger, who is hurt, Carson Wentz with his foot. So if neither one of those two guys play, Jacob Eason is going to be the starter. And not good for any of these pass catchers. So yeah, those are your pivots for that news. So just make some smart decisions. If you don't feel comfortable with it, say if you have Irv Smith and you're trying to pivot to one of those Vikings tight ends and you're not comfortable with it, don't do it. Wait, go look at other things on the waiver wire. See possibly if somebody in your league is willing to trade for one of those lower tight ends that still have upside to give you fantasy production. But yeah, so let's hop in now and end the show with some risers and droppers. So again, my risers, Gus Edwards, I think he bumps up to a running back too. And in an offense like the Ravens where they run the ball a lot, there's a possibility he could hop into a running back one role. We'll just have to see if the touchdowns can catch up to the rest of the production. Again, Damian Harris, talked about him with Mac Jones. Without Cam Newton, higher chances of touchdowns, more touches on the ground because of the emptiness of that backfield now. They have Ramondre Stevenson there who impressed during preseason. But again, a lot of those attempts Cam was hogging. He is now not there. So Damian Harris, I believe, goes up. At most for me, though, a middle tier running back 2. And then Marquez Callaway. I think he's going to be the Saints' number 1 wide receiver, and that bumps him into easily a flex play every week, possibly even wide receiver 2. And with the Jameis Winston situation as the starter situation now, I think that helps his value go up quite a bit. Some droppers, a trade we didn't talk about, Darrell Henderson for the Rams. The Rams went out and traded for Sony Michel. I don't think Sony Michel is going to be the guy, but I also don't think Darrell Henderson is going to be the guy now. I think they're going to split. A lot of the passing work is going to go to Sony Michel. So Henderson at most is a very, very, very downgraded Derrick Henry, where he's just going to be running the ball, not catching the ball, and at most he's a very low-end running back 2 now. Irv Smith, because of his injury, I think you should plan on him not being back for the rest of the season. That would be the best thing to do. But if you do have him, just slip him into that IR spot and put somebody else on your bench. And then Traquan Smith. The talks of Michael Thomas not being there for a while put Traquan Smith into he's obviously going to be the wide receiver 1 for the Saints. Well, with Marquez Callaway going out and doing what he did in the preseason, and now Smith dealing with an injury, his value has to drop a lot. I think he'll still be viable once he comes back. But I think Marquez Callaway really took over that wide receiver room under Michael Thomas whenever Thomas comes back, if he does this season. So Traquan Smith is another dropper. All right, so that is it. Thank you for watching the show. Don't forget to go and follow the links. We'll put them right here. And then tune in next week. Jacob, Ben will both be back, and we will have a special guest next week as well as we go over the Week 1 fantasy outlook. So I am Ricky Larson. Thanks for watching. Tune in next time.